There we go. Calum and Lauren are with us tonight, and they are both founders from Sonnen Hill up in Caledon, am I correct? Caledon neck of the woods, north of Caledon, right? So, and they've been brewing for some time, but I can't remember. You guys opened your tap room, or did you have a tap room? I can't
We have
remember.
a tap room now, but we opened up our beer garden last year, and that was the
That was
first
it.
time we had like a
Yes.
space
Yeah.
to drink.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I remember going up to uh, Badlands one day on a Saturday in early 2020, and I thought, oh, Sonnen Hill isn't too far from here. Maybe I should go there too. And then I realized you guys weren't open. So
Yeah,
anyway, I'll turn it over to you guys. They're here to talk about their lagers, so take it away.
cool. Um, my name's Calum. I started Sonnen Hill. Um, I started working on it about 5 or 6 years ago, and we um, got a building in Caledon and renovated it. It was really run down, so we got it fairly reasonable. And then we renovated the inside. It was an old horse barn, and I've been working on it ever since. It's been a lot of work, and let me just change this view. I don't want to look at myself. um, and then yeah, so we've been making low alcohol beers, saisons, lagers, pale ales, and we do the occasional like wine beer and stuff like that that comes in a little higher. But we started the brewery, myself and my family, and um, that was the idea to make these low alcohol beers. Not a lot of people were making them, as far as I could see, and I started my brewing career in England. I worked at a couple breweries over there. I worked at one in London called Partisan, and uh, one in Manchester called Cloudwater, and one in London again called Brew by Numbers. And then I studied at Harriet Watt. There's a brewing course that they do there. That's in Edinburgh, and basically I'm from this area, and I moved back and decided to start a brewery here. Um, so we made a lot of saisons initially. There maybe like the first 10 beers that we made here were just all going into oak, and we used them for blending. And um, then we started making a few pale ales. I just wanted to make sure that I could make these styles that were maybe a little bit more forgiving initially before diving into making lagers. And now lager production's probably 80% of what we do. Um, so yeah, I really like making lagers because they're technically demanding, I think, and I prefer drinking lager to any other style. Um, and yeah, I don't know what the best structure for this is, but do people have questions or stuff like that for us as we go, or is it better for me to just ramble on?
I think what we were I think what the plan was to do a bit of a tasting with your loggers. So I think
Okay.
I think everybody, I don't know if everybody, but I think a bunch of people on the call uh, had purchased at least a 4 pack. Some of us went a little bit more, which was
Okay.
okay, right? And so we have the Gold, the Vienna, the Low and Slow, and the Munich.
Okay.
I went a little bit further and bought a couple of this and that's because I like
Me
that,
too.
and I also bought the lager beer because I like that too. So you know,
Cool.
um, so yeah, so we were wondering, like, I guess to kind of taste one, and you tell us like what you were thinking, I guess, when or how you guys brewed it, etc. And then we can go from there. So
Sure.
whichever one you want to choose first, I guess.
Cool. Yeah, I think Lauren kind of set it out so that we're kind of starting with the lowest alcohol and easiest drinking one first. So like
Okay.
the low and slow is kind of what we were thinking. Lauren's better at tasting and like tasting notes, so she might have a little bit more input there. But I can talk about the brewing process. We made it with Willibald. Our they're a brewery out in Ayr in Ontario. I'm sure a lot of you have had their beer before. But Joe, their brewer, and I became friends. He also brewed in the UK, and basically we made this beer together, and we both really liked these low alcohol session beers that you get in the UK, but haven't had really many light lagers that are, well, not light lagers, but like low alcohol lagers. So we brewed this one, and it's about a third malted spelt and 2/3 Pilsner malt. It's hopped a little lower, like bittering hop a little lower than what we typically do in our pills and our lager. And um, we do a very large whirlpool edition in a lot of our lagers, even like our lager beer, which is our like not as hoppy lager and like not as bitter, we still add a decent amount of hops. And they're not like citra stuff, they're like fairly um, less um, preferred by most breweries. So we really like a lot of these noble hops.
So do you
This
stick?
one has, sorry.
Sorry, Callum. I don't want to interrupt you too much, but so do you stick with the noble hops mainly, or at least for this beer you did?
Well, yeah, noble-ish hops. I think everything that we have today is all in that German European hop range. I think there's this one is Saz and Sapphire. I really like Sapphire hops. It's nice and oil. They're nice and oily, and they're like lightly fruity, but they're nothing like crazy like American hop fruity. So you get like a nice little spice, and but they do add a. I think that hop too does add a little bit of body to the beers. It's kind of oily. But yeah, yeah.
Mm.
What for your Pilsner malt? What brand are you using, or what maltster?
We mostly order all of our malt through BSG for the lagers, so we're using Vireman, and this one I believe we've used a bunch of different Pilsner malts from Vireman, like pretty much all the ones that they offer. Um, I really like I didn't initially like it, but I've grown to like the Barca pills. We've used the normal pills, and that's the one that I thought I really liked. But it tends like even if you taste the malts, the normal pills is a little sweeter, and I do find that it lends a little bit more of a sweetness to the finished product, and especially as these beers age, I think that the Barca pills ages a little bit more gracefully than the just standard Pilsner malt. We have used like the Bohemian pills and like the floor malted Bohemian pills, and they're both nice. The Bohemian pills is a little bit of a different one. I don't know. We have used it a couple of times, and all the beers that we've used it in, we get about 5% less apparent attenuation, which I don't know if it's just less modified and we're using the same mash schedule when we're using both those, but I haven't made it made a pills with that malt and extended the low temperature rest yet. I was just kind of doing the exact same thing, but those ones did attenuate 5% less, and we've used multiple yeast strains with it. So it's like a common thing that I've seen across multiple yeast strains. But yeah, we like the Barca pills, basically.
Nice. Lauren, what are you're sipping on the low and slow? What for those of us who don't have it, I mean, I do, luckily. So could you describe a little bit about it? Because I like what I'm tasting. It's like you'd never guess this was only like 3.5%, and the body is there. It's like, oh.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone who put an order in. We really appreciate it. It's fun to be able to do a tasting. I have a background in hospitality and education, and I'm a certified Cicerone, so tasting's a big part of what I do and my job. So there's nothing better than just drinking a beer and talking about it. So this one, I think, like the original concept, like Cal said, was to create a low strength but full-bodied lager. And I think if you were to drink this side by side with our lager beer, I don't know if you'd be able to tell, not necessarily the difference, but the difference in strength. I don't think you'd be able to tell. And I think a lot of that comes down to the use of the spelt. So the spelt really added a nice weight to it, but we also carved it fairly low, just to make sure that it didn't thin out if it was higher carbed. So with this one, I really do get a lot of the sapphire hops. They're one of the hops that I find easiest to identify just because they have a very sweet aroma to them. Like Cal said, they're very oily, but there's like a dried orange peel, kind of like a sweet floral thing, even like some honeysuckle. I've heard them described as like mandarin before. So there's definitely like that hoppy sweetness to it. There's also some saz in this as well. So yeah, I think I get a bit of a nutty quality from the spelt. That's pretty common as well. So it's an interesting, pretty complex little beer, and it drinks very full. And I think it's retained a lot of its bitterness as well. I don't know if anyone else is drinking along or what they think.
Yeah, I think it's a great beer. I mean, I've never had it before, so but you know, the initial, I guess, at first blush, you would kind of say, well, 3.5%, it's gonna taste like water. It's not gonna, this is really this is a full-bodied beer, right? At 3.5%, and it's this is the type of beer I think a lot of I know at least a handful of people on the call that they want to kind of aim to brew, because it's something that you could drink and not, you can still function. You know, you don't have to worry about it too much, and it's full bodied, and it's still it's refreshing. So
this style of beer is one that really lends itself to that kind of weight. I make a bunch of these, mostly inspired by you, but also that Zatz and Saphir combo is just like.
I know for those that joined us for a meeting, I think it was October, when Annie Johnson spoke to us. She was also all about Saaz and Saphir as well, in terms of that combination for lagers. So it's really interesting to hear another like really reputable lager producer to also use that combo.
What brewery was that?
Annie Johnson, I forget her brewery, but she's in the States.
She's in Portland, out of the Portland, Oregon area. But she had won the American Homebrew National Homebrewer competition back in 2013, and she'd also won a Pilsner or Kel competition where they actually judged the Pilsners, Czech Pils, that people had brewed in San Francisco in 2012, right? And she had received high praise from the Pilsner Urquell staff and brewers who had judged it. But the Saphir, going back to the Saphir and Saaz combo, I can totally understand both Calum, what you said, and Lauren, what you said, because the aroma, you are catching that sort of like you said, mandarin, sort of a little bit of a fruity aroma, but the oily is in the mouthfeel, right? And that's where I find it, at least, right? So
Yeah, so with this one too, I was a little bit, we didn't actually hit all of our brewing targets with this one just because we were, it was the first time that we haven't made a lager and tried to make it as dry as possible. So I've made a lot of like table beers in the past and these like really low alcohol kind of beers suited for cask. And quite often we're mashing like for a beer like that in the pale ale category, we'd be mashing at um, sometimes 72 to 74, like very high, and then mash out once you have conversion. And then with this one, we went a little bit more conservative with it, like because I'd never made a low alcohol beer with lager yeast. So we mashed at about 68 and then ramped it up to um, 71, which is fairly typical. We like to do the step mash for all of our lagers. So we'll usually mash on the low end and we'll ramp it up after about an hour to 71. And then we'll hold it at 71 until we get conversion and then we'll mash out. But with this one, we mashed 68 initially and then went up to 71. But we didn't get a ton of attenuation from the lager yeast. Like even when we're mashing for attenuation, we still get only about 80% attenuation. But if we used Cal Ale, which we use in our ales, we'd probably see 85 to 90. So we mash high on our pale ales and stuff, and we still get an 80% attenuation. So this one's actually 3.1%, and it attenuated down to I think about 10, 12 or 10, 13. Not exact. I can't really remember what it started at, but yeah.
So do you find that the like obviously keeping it at around 10, 12, 10, 13, you're gonna get that sort of feeling that it's not as it doesn't thin it out sort of thing, right? It keeps the body.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in the like I've heard varying opinions on like, oh, you don't need like the mashing high and the high residual sweetness for low alcohol beers might not be like some people say that it doesn't matter as much as say like adding character malts and stuff like that, but we don't use really any care malt in any of our beers. We just use wheat and pills mostly, and we just mash accordingly. But I do like, especially in these table beers, I think that high finishing gravity is almost essential. And I think that it's just like high finishing gravity and then higher bitterness. There's just like more in the beer. It's like it fills it out a lot. So like the bitterness for some of the lower alcohol beers is still 30 or so IBUs, like I guess, but rather than it finishing drier and then having to knock down the bitterness, there's just less in the beer. That's my thinking about it. But
I guess talking about your mashing, what size batches are you making? Are they like small, like 1 to 2 barrel or like 10, 15 barrel?
we make 20 hectoliters. We knock out 18 and a half hec on our beers. So we have our brew house is a 3-vessel system. We have a mash kettle, so it's a dual vessel, but it's got an agitator in it and it is steam. There's steam on it. And then we transfer over to a lauter tun, and then we have height adjustable rakes in our lauter tun, so we can cut the bed nicely and we can get a really good lauter and not pull any heavy pressure on the bed. And then we go back into the mash kettle and then we boil there, and then we have a separate whirlpool.
It's a pretty hefty system for a farmhouse.
Yeah, it's a really good system. Yeah,
It's shiny.
it's, yeah. Yeah, it's made by Newlands. They're out of business now, and they're another company, but they're based out of British Columbia.
I had another question as long as I was going. Do
Yeah, of
you
course.
find that the sapphire tends to dominate the flavor profile of the SAD? So do you like play with the percentages of the hops at all to try and balance that out, or do you not find sapphire as strong as I have in the past?
Yeah, so we've done an all sapphire beer, and it almost comes across more as like a blonde ale. So it's like not. It is pretty dominating, but I really like it. It's probably my favorite hop, and then the Saz with this one though, I think it's a very spice. Like this one's much more spicy when they're paired together. But yeah, we usually use sapphires in every one of our lager beers. Like we have a brand called Lager Beer, and we always have used sapphire, and then we just change the secondary hop pretty much every single batch. But yeah.
I didn't mean bad when I say dominating. I just meant
No, not at all. Not at all. No, I like it, so it's all good, I guess.
Yeah, it's tasty. Like I said, I had the lager beer was the first one I had, and I was like, wow, if the rest of them are this good, this is going to be great. And then I had the gold the other night, and I was like, oh, this is really good too. Right? And now I had the low and slow, and it's like, ooh, this is. Now I'm kind of indecisive as to which one I like the best so far. So anyhow, I don't know if we should move along. I don't want to rush people into the drinking because that's not a good idea. So, but
It's my birthday. It's a great idea, Dave.
okay, yeah, it is your birthday. So, sure, let's take a look at the next beer. What's the next one that you would suggest?
Well, I plan to go.
Lauren, take it away.
Yeah, I plan to go right into the gold. We're just kind of tasting in order of, I think, intensity, not alcohol intensity, but flavor.
Yeah.
The gold is actually our strong lager, so we're doing a low alcohol, higher alcohol back to back. So Cal, do you want to talk about your concept?
Sure, yeah. So the gold was made. I wanted to make a stronger lager, but a lot of the stronger lagers that I've had have they taste quite sweet quite often. So we made this one actually with the amylo 300 enzyme, the amyloglucosidase. So this is like some of extra dry beer. We've done it a few times in the past. We have a couple of beers that we make with that. So this beer finishes like well below zero, or well below, it's like 0.9996 or something like that is what we get on the density meter. So it's very similar grist to our lager beer, and then we just add enzymes and we get the extra strength from the over attenuation. So I think the dryness helps not give it as much of a perception of sweetness, but that's kind of what we thought with this one. And then we did a big whirlpool edition with, this one was Herzbrucker and Saz, and I don't know, like there's certain hops that I've noticed, like we try a lot of these noble hops, but some Tettnang and Herzbrucker, they give like a like extra floral character that we like I don't see in some of the other hops. Like I really like Saz, I like Sapphire, but some of the Herzbrucker and Tettnang, and we use a lot of British hops too, and they all give different, like as you'd expect, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, so drinking this one, I always thought it was pretty restrained. The malt, I think it was decocted for 5 to 10 minutes. So the malt is very like light honey, like a little bit of biscuit. And then I get more of like a spicy anise hop aroma up front. But I get more of the floral hop character in the actual flavor of the beer, and especially in the aftertaste.
Mm.
But it drinks really nice and dry and smooth, and I don't know, if I was drinking these two, the low and slow and this one side by side, I don't think I could tell the elevated alcohol, which is really neat.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most incredible things about this, because the gold, I can taste all those other differences that you're mentioning, Lauren, but you can't discern any difference in terms of alcohol or body, etc. It just seems like it's just as good or just as full in the mouth. They're just so tasty, right? So
It's dangerous.
yeah.
You had mentioned that the gold is decocted. So when you're designing or thinking about at a conceptual level a lager beer, when do you decide when you want to decoct something or not?
We decoct almost every single lager. The low and slow was maybe the last one that we haven't decocted. We do like a 10-minute usually little single decoction. We've noticed like a slight bump in attenuation, like as opposed to not doing it. So like we'll maybe get from like 78, 79 to 81, 82 kind of thing. So it's like, I think a little bit drier, but I think it just adds like a little bit more tannin. And then we get like in some of our lagers, when we do it, I think that we get like almost like a Twizzler red licorice kind of thing sometimes in the aroma that I think is like kind of nice. I think it blends nicely, but we just do a single decoction. Our system's not really set up to do anything else. So as we're transferring, so we have our mash kettle, we go through the steps, and before we mash out, we then send 2/3 of the mash over to our lauter tun, boil the remaining, and then once it's boiled, then we use it to like hit our mash out temp.
The 10 minutes that you're taking to do that decoction, how, I'm assuming it adds more than just 10 minutes to your entire day, right? So how much longer or how much shorter, I guess, would your day be if you didn't do the 10-minute decoction?
I think that the 10-minute probably adds about 45 minutes to the day.
Yeah.
But like like the next beers that we are tasting, I think they got like a half-hour decoction. So it's like an hour essentially on your day. We didn't do it on the low and slow, and it was partly because of that reason. We were kind of just like, let's finish early.
That's always good too, right? Especially if you're going in for these longer days. Yeah. It's interesting that using the enzyme. I normally you hear about, like, this is the first time I've heard of using it in a lager beer, but obviously it makes sense, right? I mean, I normally hear about it. Most of I think people I've heard about wanting to use it usually use it on, IPAs and stuff like that, right? So
yeah,
it's using brute IPAs, right? If I'm correct.
Yeah, and like macro lager producers will use it too, quite regularly, I think.
Yeah,
there's a question. The name is that we use. It's from BSG. It's called Amulo 300, but you can get it from White Labs. I want to say it's called Clarity Firm or something like that.
Something firm.
But it's the enzyme's called amyloglucosidase, and there's a couple manufacturers of it, but we add it to the fermenter. If you add it to the mash, you're not going to get nearly as much attenuation.
Yeah, it's if you're looking for it, you can get it in smaller quantities from White Labs, like you said, Cal. It's ultra firm.
Ultra
Yeah,
firm.
yeah. Clarity Firm helps that beer get clear.
It's the
Yeah,
protease.
that's like gluten.
Pardon me?
gluten
It's a
enzyme or
protease
something.
enzyme.
Yeah. But the it is kind of neat. Like I said, it's I didn't realize that macro producers were using it in their lagers. I mean, but then again, I'm not drinking macro lagers, so.
I don't think it's
Oh,
every
oh.
one of them, but some of them do, I think.
Okay.
I have a quick question, Callum. Are you guys using like different lager yeasts in your lagers, or do you kind of use one or two of the same ones for most of your pale lagers, or what?
We like to use the Premium Pils yeast from Escarpment. It's a Pilsner Urquell strain. It's their D strain, apparently. That's what Richard told me, at least. So we use that. It gets pretty good attenuation. I know a lot of brewers in Ontario use the ISAR lager yeast. I think it gets a slightly higher attenuation, but the Premium Pils is pretty good. I've used the Beer Garden one before, and the Premium Pils one flocculates better, so it's good for harvesting. And then occasionally we'll use 3470, just dry fermentous yeast, if we miss a pitch or something like that, or we miss a crop,
Okay,
or
cool.
attenuation, or cell count is bad or something.
That's neat. Because I think like I know the Premium Pils that you mentioned from Escarpment, I think it's the same or similar strain to White Labs 800. I think I could be wrong on that, but I think it is.
It might be, for sure.
Yeah, it's I would say, yeah. I mean, comparatively speaking, I think I think you find that with 3470, I'm just my own personal opinion, just as a home brewer, I get a lot of sulfur. I got to let it sit for like a long time. So
Yeah.
Aren't you fermenting under pressure, Dave? Doesn't it crush it?
no, it doesn't crush the sulfur, unfortunately.
It works for me.
Oh,
Sorry.
Add in some copper, you'll get rid of the sulfur.
right. So but the beer, like I've liked, like I said, I've had the gold, I've had the low and slow. Looking forward to having the next two, the Munich and the Vienna, right? What kind of prompted you guys to decide on, like, I know you said you like lager beers, and I know I do. Did you think you were taking a risk at the time? Because I guess when you guys were first coming around, things were more either Belgian styles, or everybody was trying to be an IPA factory. So did you feel like we're gonna do something different, or did you feel like, oh, we're taking a chance here?
I don't think that I really thought too much about it, to be honest. I kind of just like we were coming to a batch about 100 that we've made here, and we didn't brew a lager for the first 40 batches. I really wanted to learn the system and dial everything in, and so it was about 1.5 years before we made lager here. But like, it was always the intention. I just wanted to make sure that I knew all the, like, really felt comfortable, and then just kind of went for it. And they sell twice as fast as all the other beers, at least. So
Wow.
that's always good. So I just don't think there's many producers making them in the same volume. So it's like people like our customers, they'll be like, oh, if we're gonna get a lager, we'll go to this place. Just like how people go to the hazy IPA places for the hazy IPAs.
Yeah. Yep. Do you find in doing them, Calum, do you find that it's because they are lagers, usually they would take a bit longer to get out the door, sort of thing, versus turning over the tanks? Do you find that to be a problem, or does it help with respect to your scheduling of when you brew and how you brew them, or sorry, what you're brewing?
Yeah, so like the lagers, we do find that there's a nice rhythm that we can get into because we are only a very small team. We have had 4 people at one point, but it's just Lauren and I in the brewery. So we're hiring someone soon, and we do our primary fermentation, and we see final gravity in about 7 to 10 days. And then we drop the temperature slow, but not crazy. And then we get down, crop, and we leave it cold for about 2 weeks, I would say. So we're like at the 3-week mark. We usually then centrifuge it. We have a small centrifuge. So like 3 to 4 weeks we centrifuge, and then we spun all of our tanks, so the carb's pretty much there. We get it up to about 2.2 volumes, and then once we are through the centrifuge, we give it a little bit more to get it to the desired temp, or sorry, the desired carb, and then it's in the bright tank for about 4 to 7 days typically as we get it ready for packaging. But I'm not a huge believer in the you have to lager them for ages. Like all of our beers, when they're in the fermenter, they're free of off flavors usually. Like we do a diacetyl rest at the end of fermentation, so we don't see a lot of diacetyl production. And then we also have a centrifuge, so we don't need to wait for things to clarify. We don't use any fining agents or anything like that. So we just spin them bright, and then the centrifuge is like when you taste the beer pre-centrifuge, there's a sight glass and also like a sample port on the inlet and the outlet. And going through the centrifuge, it's like something's been sitting in a tank for 3 to 4 weeks. And I just think that a lot of people talk about the like the flavor development in lagers that are lagered longer, and that it needs to be lagered. But when you drop out a lot of, like, I think that one of the major things for like the smooth character is dropping out all the protein and polyphenol and some of that, because when I take tank samples you just learn that, like, oh, pre-centrifuge, you taste stuff and you're like, oh, that's gonna go away. And then it just, like, in the bright tank, it doesn't taste like that. So there's like usually a drying or a harsh, like, grainy thing maybe right at the end of fermentation, but I think you're just getting a mouthful of yeast basically.
Interesting. Yeah, we did have a question that asked about how long you lagered, but I think you already answered that. So
yeah, it'll be anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks usually, cold, and then the primary fermentation is that 7 to 10 days. So we could see usually our tank turn time is anywhere from 4 to 5 weeks usually.
Yeah.
So it's not crazy. Like a lot of pale ale producers take a similar time.
Yep, that's true. That's true. Wow, it's that's impressive, because I always thought like it's only the home brewers who want to turn the lagers around quickly, right, sort of thing, and get them out the door, sort of thing. But it's clear that from the flavor, at least for me, it's proof is in the pudding, sort of thing. So
Yeah.
Sorry, just a question about the centrifuge, because I feel like I haven't really talked to many, especially smaller craft breweries that have a centrifuge. How much volume can it take in one batch? How long, when you're spinning it, does it take to sort of run its course?
So yeah, we run from one tank to the other. There's like quite a long, like there's a setup. You do a CIP, and then you do you have your bright tank CIP and purge. So it's like a whole day process. But the actual run, we run at about 10 to 12 hectoliters an hour. So it's usually in the bright tank in about an hour and a half.
It's a flow through system, right? So it goes into one end of the centrifuge and it gets spun and comes out the other, but it's like a continuous process. It's not like you're loading the entire volume and then spinning it and then emptying it, right?
Okay.
Exactly. So you're going gradually. So as we're flowing through, we're like, it's ticking over at that like 10 liters every couple of seconds or whatever. So we have a flow meter on it, and we're just monitoring our flow, and we're monitoring our turbidity. So we have there's an outlet turbidity meter. So you're adjusting. The way that it works is you have your ours is a manual centrifuge. A lot of people, it's like set it or forget it, but we basically can control the back pressure, and we can control the flow rate, and that's how we change our speed, and we change our turbidity. So it gives you a lot of control.
wow. That was a good question though, Dave, because I was about to ask that as well, because I don't know out of the smaller craft producers, I don't know anybody who's got a centrifuge, right? So
Yeah, I think we're one of the first of the smaller breweries that have one. It's something that I wanted to get from the beginning, because I do think it's like adding a couple more tanks, basically.
Rather than letting it sit and wait to clear, sort of thing. So.
Yeah.
I'm oh, you can't see my glass, but I'm all out. So what's the next beer, Lauren?
We're gonna do the Vienna.
Okay.
So this was a funny one, because in the winter we were very lager and saison heavy. So someone would come to the brewery and had never been there before, and kind of like giving them the rundown of what we had, and the answer became like, oh, we have 7 lagers and they all like these little nuances in them, and we have 10 saisons and they all have these little nuances. We were kind of missing out on some other styles that maybe people would be coming to us for. So we decided to try a couple maltier offerings, and so we did the Vienna and then the Munich, which we'll try next. So really wanted to focus on making these very malt forward, and the idea of being able to see what it was like to brew with just 100% of the malt was very good for Cal, because I don't think he worked with either of these very much. So getting to see their character and how it works to brew with them. And it was just funny that historically these malts were invented at the same time, and then we were using them in one brew after another, basically. It was kind of cool. Cal, did you want to add anything about this one?
No, you pretty much covered the idea. But yeah, I hadn't used Munich malt or Vienna malt in a large way, so that's why we made these 2 beers. Like I know that Vienna, like I was looking at a lot of Vienna lager recipes and stuff like that, and it's like it's quite often not just all Vienna malt. same, like I didn't really know many beers for the next one that we have, the next beer that we're going to talk about. I didn't know of any that were all Munich malt beers. So usually they have like some special like caramel malt and stuff like that, or their blend of stuff. So yeah.
So this Vienna is 100% Vienna malt. I mean, in the sense that there's nothing else in it.
Well, we added like 2% acid malt.
Well, yeah.
But it's all Vienna malt otherwise, and that is we used bark of Vienna malt on this one. They have that bark of variety of barley, and I haven't used the other Vienna malt, but I just didn't want it to be sweet, and we had gotten sweet notes off of the just regular German Pilsner malt before.
I was just about to say, because normally I would expect it to be a little bit sweeter because it's 100% Vienna, but I guess there's a difference, obviously. So, and it doesn't taste, it's sweeter, no two ways about it. It's sweeter than the last beer we had, but it's not the sweetness that I almost thought I was going to get.
Yeah.
I traditionally don't like Vienna lagers, so I was like, I don't know if I should get the Vienna. I might skip this one, but I really like this one. It's a style, yeah. A lot of Viennas, just like you said, Dave, they're a bit sweeter and not quite to my liking, but this one's really nice.
Yeah, when I brew at home, I use 100% Vienna. But when I was at the brewery, I did Pilsner and Vienna, but I think I prefer 100% Vienna better. The color is nicer and just brings you better flavor on it. You just put just Vienna and just hop it up, and then it seemed to work out pretty good. I like it better than cutting it with the Pilsner.
Yeah, it's all about balance. And I think we balanced this one nicely with the hops. It has a decent bitterness, and it still finishes like off dry to me, but it has that really nice malt forward mid palate that I really like, and the maltiness really comes through.
Again, the whole thing is, oh,
and the color I find is nicer too if you go 100% Vienna. Brings a nice sort of mahogany amber color.
it's sort of funny because the like you're saying, Lauren, the hops, they really balance it out, and I looked at the ABV and I'm thinking, geez, it doesn't taste like a 4.8% beer. It tastes like a 5.5, 5.6, or something that you expect out of a commercial, I guess, Vienna, right? So, but it's still, the body's there, right? So it's really good.
Well, this one was decocted as well for a little bit longer than the gold. So it really developed the malt, and it has a little bit of that. Calum was talking about the Twizzler malt character a little bit before, and I think a little bit of that is here with a little bit of honey and maybe some biscuit.
Honey, definitely. I would say honey is almost definite there, but I guess you kind of expect that a little bit of that sweet aroma from the Vienna malt, right? So very tasty.
I like how it dries though. The other local Vienna in our area is the Calum Hills, and that is just a sugar bomb in comparison to this. This is just so much more balanced and easy to get through.
Yeah, that's the key to drinkability, I find, and that's what I'm always tasting for in every single beer style. Is it balanced? It doesn't matter if it is malt forward or hop forward. You've got to balance it in some way, otherwise it becomes too cloying or too heavy on the palate, and it's no fun to drink. So yeah.
What do you use for yeast on this one? Just regular, as the other lagers, the same yeast?
The premium pills, yeah. All the 3 beers that we've had so far are premium pills. This one got, I'm just looking at the brew sheet now. We added, like, I think that helping with the sweetness of maybe some of the malt character that you might get, we hop them quite heavily. Like this, we have it as like a 30 IBU edition up front, and then we do a whirlpool edition of 7.5 grams per liter on most of our hoppy lagers. So it's like, this is a very similar, like we go about 10 more IBUs for the pills, but this is somewhere halfway between like our lager beer bitterness and our pills bitterness. But we do add a lot of hops. I think I haven't talked to a commercial brewery that adds more in the whirlpool than that.
Yeah, that's I think that's significant. You know, I guess you keep thinking about how much hops people add or breweries add in the whirlpool, and a lot of times, at least I'm not too sure if the brewing software accommodates for it, but it does add to bitterness even in the whirlpool, and but it's not a harsh bitterness. It's not like you're adding all these hops at a 60-minute boil sort of thing. So it is interesting though, because do you guys find the hops, because the hops that you're choosing to use, right, which is not the, I want to say trendy hops, but the, you know, the fruit forward American style hops mostly, or Australian style hops, etc. Do you find it's from a cost perspective, it's also good for you? Like, I mean,
yeah, for sure, they're much cheaper. Like we still use those more expensive hops in the pale ales and stuff like that, but yeah, it's great. I think like they're usually around the $10 to $15 a pound, and then the other ones that we use are usually around double that.
Yeah.
So I guess you do most of your hop additions at flame out and whirlpool compared to boiling, like, you know, 60 or whatever, like throughout the boil hops, because I guess you get more flavors and stuff out of it that way.
Yeah, we do that. We mostly just add them in the whirlpool. I played around with 10-minute additions and stuff like that too. Haven't noticed too much of a difference, so we just keep them out of the kettle mostly, and then just right in the whirlpool.
Yeah. So no boiling hops, basically just near the end is where you get.
Yeah, we use extract for bittering.
Okay.
What kind of temperature do you drop in the whirlpool hops at?
It's usually around, once it gets over, it's about 92 to 93 Celsius. Our boiling temperature is a little less here, so like once after the transfer and like a little liquor back, we end up around the 92 to 93.
Kyle had a good comment in the chat there. He said for it having that honey flavor, it isn't imparting the honey sweetness, which is an important and rare distinction. I would agree. I think it's, you know, having the flavor without that, just took a big sip of honey, right? It is a big distinction. So.
A spoonful of honey.
Yeah, exactly. It's really tasty. And I would agree with what David said earlier. Like, I don't normally veer towards Viennas, and it's probably one of the styles I've never bothered to look at, but this is really good. And it's Lauren, as you said, it's a balance, right? And if the balance is there, it may not matter what style it is, right? You know, to me, but this is really good.
Yeah, I think Viennas are nice. It gets you away from your regular pales, get the color. And then when I was at the brewery too, like Vienna was one of the top, you know, taking over the top sales because it was, again, lager. They kind of liked it because the sweetness and also the color, which was nice.
A lot of the commercial examples are badly done though. So, you know,
it all depends on the brewer, I guess, right? How they want to do
Yeah.
it. I mean, somebody else can do it, but they might get it right or they might just miss it by a little bit, and that little bit might be just what it needs to be off.
Lauren and Cal, do you guys think that because we're talking about lagers tonight, do you see this being the next sort of wave, or I don't want to say trend, but because we've gone through, you know, West Coast IPAs a long time ago, we've gone through hazies, you know, there's always been Belgians around, sort of thing. So do you see the lagers coming back?
Well, I hope so. I really like to see more of them. I think they're so challenging technically to make, and it's hard to do like really right. So I feel like it's more miss than hit when I go and try to drink others. And I really wish there was more out there. But there are breweries that are experimenting, like Godspeed is doing like a huge range of, and he's like all in on the lagers. It's like all he makes. And I think that's brave, and people really like what he's doing. And yeah, it's nice to have some go-to breweries that you can trust to make a good lager, because it's not easy. And you see, I don't know if anyone's seen on Instagram, like the Miller High Life label kind of lookalikes and all of that. Like, it's definitely a nostalgia thing. Like, everyone probably started off drinking these macro beers, and yeah, there is a nostalgia to it. And yeah, it's kind of cool to see label art that's kind of trying to mimic that. Yeah.
True enough. I was going to also ask because you have the Cicerone designation. I was going to ask, like, what would you like with the Vienna? What would you pair it with, like from a food perspective?
Like, I guess it would depend on whether it finished sweeter or drier. But I think the malt itself has like a relatively low sweetness and a really nice toast kind of bready thing. So like, I like to be unconventional, and I would even pair like a beer like that with like a creamy dessert as well. But like, it's obviously a no-brainer for anything that's pork or you know, something fatty and rich. This one I think has enough bitterness to offset that kind of thing. But yeah, like those toasty beers, like they go so well with anything with cream in it, or sandwiches. I come to mind, like a nice butcher's sandwich.
I was just going to say that, David.
Grilled cheese.
I would. You're making me hungry. I wish I had like a schnitzel sandwich.
Schnitzel, grilled
Vienna,
cheese,
it'd be
pork
so
sandwich.
smash burger.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's really good. I mean, it's something that we've only recently sort of started to scratch the surface with from in the brew club, to looking at beer as tonkatsu, right? As you know, in terms of ensuring that we have food to pair with the beer, so that we get the most out of both. You know, both the food that we've got and the beer that we have as well. So I just heard another can open there, so I assume we're looking at. Are we looking at the Munich?
Good ears you got. Look at you. You better
just
your beer first.
Just before we move on to the Munich, if people don't mind humoring me just for a second, we're talking a few minutes ago about hops. I'm wondering if Sonnen Hill has ever really dabbled in Ontario grown hops at all. Obviously, there are quite a few producers that have been popping up over the past 5 years and are really, I think, trying to get their product to market. So I'm wondering if you've ever experimented with Ontario hops, and if so, what varieties I don't think they've really done too many like noble hop varieties, but I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what you've maybe used in the past.
I saw Cal step away. Are you here, Cal?
I'm here, yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, we've used a couple Ontario hops. We've used Cascade and Chinook from Ontario. We use them semi-regularly in the mixed culture beers. And we use all Ontario ingredient grain for that, as we have from the beginning. So those beers, we kind of try to create like a little bit of a distinction between the beers. So all the mixed culture beers are all Ontario grain and sometimes Ontario hops, but not always. But we use mixed culture and the spontaneous fermentation, and we blend it in, and it's kind of like a nice difference. So that's more like you're kind of like, you have to let those fermentations kind of do their thing. And then on the lager side, we haven't used a ton of Ontario ingredients. We've done a couple beers with all Ontario malt for the lagers, and then but we mostly use German ingredients for the lagers. We have done a couple beers with there's this Quebec producer. They're called Bastion hops, and they have some of the more noble varieties. So they sell Crystal. It's not a noble variety, but it does have some sort of noble qualities. And they also have Triple Pearl. I think some of the Ontario producers grow that too, but it's like a Perla hop that you get in Germany. So, but they were really nice out in Quebec, and I think that we might try to get some more of those varieties, just because I haven't heard of too many Ontario breweries making, or Ontario hop farmers growing some of the more noble varieties. But yeah.
So for your grains, you said you use some Ontario grains. Is that because of the flavor difference compared to the German stuff, or is it the availability that you get from it, or what point of view is it?
There is some of the flavor difference. We use a lot of the raw grains in those mixed culture beers, but I think there's also like a little bit of a romantic thing about it too, where it's like those kinds of beers are more like from the place rather than, and then it makes them a little bit more unique. Whereas the lager brewing, we're not necessarily going for that kind of character in the lager beers. We're more going for like how not classic, but like I think they're like modern beers, but made in like a classic way.
Right. So like for your lagers, I guess lagers are standard German old school lagers. You want to stick with the German grains compared to if you do something else, let's say local ales or what have you, then you would use the Ontario stuff, I guess, because different flavor sort of profiles and stuff, right?
Yeah, we went a whole year with just using Ontario grain, and I did notice a flavor contribution in the pale ales and the lagers that we have done it with, but I like the character in the saisons and stuff, but I don't know if I was in love with the character in the lagers. Like I preferred the German
right
ingredients.
Cool. Now, you guys do any like wheat beers, like German wheat beers and that, like, or you don't, I guess, right?
We haven't, but I would like to try one. I'd like to do one with all pale wheat.
Yeah, like a nice Hefeweizen, kind of nice for the summer, like a nice low Hefe. Like that's sort of my go-to anyway. But that's also nice, nice summer beer to sit back and just sip on. So
yeah.
Looking at this Munich, this is gorgeous. It's a beautiful looking beer.
Is it a bit, I can't see the picture. Is it more amber than
it's more, yeah. It leans more into that into that
Okay.
amber/orange spectrum, I guess you could say,
So like
right?
copper,
Yes,
mahogany
copper.
sort of.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
It is a beautiful, beautiful beer.
I have not done a Munich one yet. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I did the other one, but not Munich, so I should try it. Actually.
Yeah. Lauren, could you just tell us what you're getting out of this?
I mean, I think the malt character on both of these is so simple, but it has a lot of depth as well. Like I get like toasty bread crust, so it's almost like a step up or a step deeper and darker than the Vienna. Maybe like a darker Melba toast. It has a sweetness, but like it's almost like a dark berry and not like a honey to me. I really like this beer because of how bitter it finishes and how dry. I think out of the two of them, this one had less hops than the Vienna, but it turned out to be a lot more bitter, a lot more dry. And I think that this malt is a little bit more drying in general than the Vienna would be. But yeah, trying to make a malty lager, the Vienna at first was like, oh, that's not really super malty. And then we did this one and it was like, okay, there you go. There's the malty lager. So I think it turned out really well. And I think Cal's inspiration was a smaller producer who was using 100% Munich for alt beers that they were making. So, and we use Munich type 1, not Munich type 2, which is a little darker. And then there's,
I was going to say, I was going to assume that it was Munich type 1. I was going to say like Munich type 2 would probably suit that alt beer probably pretty well, right? So
yeah, there's also some Mandarina Bavaria in here, so that could be accounting for the little bit of fruitiness that I'm. And once again, this one was decocted for about 20 minutes, just like the Vienna. I think they were both the same recipe basically.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know anybody else who's on the call who's got. Oh, David, I see you're drinking it as well. I mean, it's something else. I mean, normally I think of Munich and I think of Dunkel. That's about the extent of it, right? This is yeah, or Helles too. Yeah, I guess Helles. Yeah, right. So, but this is really, really, really good. And at again, it's 4.8% ABV. So I'd kill to be getting beers that are 4.8 and 4.6, etc.
I'm sure you can do it. You're famous enough to brew your own there.
So, Calum, did you were you when you first brewed this? Did you feel like your first iteration of it? Were you happy? Did you have to do tweaks? Like, how many times do you think you have to brew a lager, a beer to get it right?
I think that I'd make some changes for sure in some of the beers that we only brew once, but we actually make changes in every single beer every single time we make it. Like a lot of them don't have the exact same hops just because trying new things, but quite often we're like, oh, let's add an extra bag, let's take a bag out, let's up the bitterness by 5, stuff like that based on the previous batch. But like, I think our lager beer is starting to taste pretty dialed in, and we brewed that 10 times. But like, yeah, I think like 2 or 3 times, or like 3 or 4 times probably, and you're starting to really hit it, I think. But It's not too different. I don't think I think people, I don't think the lager brewing is that different from like ale brewing. Like I only brewed ales before, really. Like I brewed a couple lagers at Cloudwater. I wasn't really, I was more in the cellar a lot of the time. But I don't think that, yeah, I don't know if there's a whole lot of difference. You're doing, as long as you oxygenate your wort properly and you pitch a good amount of yeast, you control your fermentation temperature, raise up for a diacetyl rest, and get the yeast out of the tank as soon as it's in the bottom of the cone. I think that then your lagers will be fine.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to
No.
say, do you still find that you need the diacetyl rest with the premium pills yeast? Because I know Richard was on there one time. He says, I forget which one it was, but he said one of his pilsners, you don't need to do diacetyl because it cleans up. It doesn't have any notes on it. So that's why I'm wondering, you still find that you need that rest on that?
We do it just out of, we can't really afford to pack a whole batch of beer and then see a diacetyl spike or something. Like we just want to make sure. So we just basically ramp up. Our fermentation schedule is usually once the beer hits around 1024, so maybe about day 6 of the fermentation, 5, 6 of the fermentation, we ramp up the temperature. So it's at 1023, and then it ramps up to from 11.5 to 14. And then the next day we come in and it's sitting at 1016. And then we cap the tank and spun it to 10 psi, and then we waited 24 hours after we see apparent attenuation. Then we do a diacetyl test, and we slowly cool the tank, and then we harvest yeast.
Awesome.
You're doing a diacetyl rest at 14 Celsius?
Sorry.
Yeah. It's 3 degrees warmer than our fermentation temperature.
Yeah, I mean, as homebrewers, we're all told, yeah, take it up to 18 to 20 for diacetyl rest.
Yeah.
Mind you, I pressure ferment at 18, so I don't bother. But
yeah, so that's what we do. We have gone higher in the past, but we were getting like maybe a hint of acetaldehyde production and maybe even some higher alcohols when we were letting it ramp up a little too hot. I think maybe just the bigger fermentation too. Maybe it's just like ramps up a little too quickly. So we keep it at 14 when we ramp up.
David, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I think Calum was sort of going there when I was going to ask, for home brewers. I think many of us, not all of us, are brewing lagers, but what are your top tips for improving your lager brewing? And I think you were sort of going down that road. I think you were saying fermentation temperature, get it off the yeast pretty much as soon as possible. I think I might have missed a few, but if you had anything else to share, we'd be happy to learn.
For sure. I think that like on the brew day, the things that I pay most attention to is first is water. So we look at our whole liquor. So we treat our liquor to make sure the alkalinity. We make pale lagers without caramel malt and stuff like that usually. So we make sure our liquor is treated and the alkalinity is between 0 and 20. We have hard water, so we add phosphoric acid, or we also have an RO system. So we'll strip it back or do whatever, and we blend raw water with RO water for our beers. And then once our alkalinity is good, all the numbers land right in our mash and our boil kettle. So our pH is good in the mash. I think a major thing with brewing these low strength beers is watching your final runnings and making sure that that doesn't drop low. Or like if your pH is all good in the mash and your water doesn't have a high alkalinity, your final runnings aren't going to have a high pH. But if they drop too low, you're going to start pulling astringency and tannin, and you get this graininess that you really can't get out of the beer for months. It tends to go away after a while, but yeah. So I think that that's important. And then boiling. The main thing with these Pilsner malts is a good boil, and you want to see about 6% evaporation. I think homebrewers see a good amount of evaporation usually, right? On a professional scale, it's maybe a little harder sometimes, depending on your setup, but we boil for 75 minutes and we see that. And then I think the next thing, we try to make nice clear wort. pH is good, and we really focus on oxygenation. So we have a DO meter, and we make sure that we oxygenate our wort properly. But I think that if you're a home brewer and you want to make these, I think dry yeast is a great thing because they say you don't need to oxygenate dry yeast. So I would say like use dry yeast because the oxygenation can vary so much, and you're going to end up with crazy different off flavors depending on oxygen rate. Like we haven't had sulfur or diacetyl in our clean fermentations, and I think it's a lot of the time it's due to oxygen in the fermenter. And then if you do those fermentation techniques, I think it's all good.
That's interesting. I mean, the comment about oxygenation, because I don't have that much experience, but I mean, I think from what I remember, it was sort of like, well, if it's over 1060, put the oxygen in the wort, right? And what you're saying is oxygenate the wort regardless, because you got to get enough oxygen in there. And maybe that's the problem with why I keep thinking 3470 equals sulfur, because I don't oxygenate any of my lager worts, right? Because they're all below 1060. So something to consider.
Yeah, I found it to be probably the number one thing to like a good healthy fermentation. Like it's like as soon as if ever I saw a fermentation problem or hear of another brewer, it's like, oh well, what oxygenation rate did you, or like how much oxygen was in the wort? And usually that's like, I think it's probably the thing usually. Pitch rate probably too, but oxygen is just as important.
Mm-hmm.
And we brewed a stout recently, and I found something interesting with oxygenation in dark beers. And I'd never brewed a stout here, so I hadn't really measured dark wort oxygen saturation, and we actually saw it was very hard to saturate the wort with oxygen in these dark wort. And my only thinking, I was asking a bunch of other brewers. Only one other brewer that I know said that they saw a similar thing, and the only thing that only conclusion that I can come to is like that it's harder to saturate, or it's like the dark malts are scavenging the oxygen, or it's harder, like they're oxidizing quicker and absorbing the oxygen. So we really had to go, but like we changed the rate for the pale ale, because depending on the knockout temperature and the flow rate and everything like that, you're gonna have to change your oxygen rate.
Yeah. Wow. Geez, that's a lot to take in because I never even considered. I keep thinking I'm going back to the oxygen and just keep thinking about, I don't oxygenate my 1048 or 1046 wort, right? But now I'm thinking maybe I should.
Yeah.
It can't hurt, right? So yeah.
So,
Sorry, go ahead, Attila.
I'm sorry. How many, obviously you repitch the yeast. How many times, how many generations do you tend to go repitch before you start new yeast again? Roughly.
We only have we only have 2 fermenters and 2 brights, so we only take the yeast usually about 3 generations.
And then you got
just because it's hard to usually then it's like once we brew 3 lagers, we're also like, okay, we need to brew a pale ale or something like that, or but yeah, I'm a little scared of like micro issues with like going too far, but yeah, we only go a few generations.
Okay, cool.
But those second and third pitches of the yeast, we knock the temperature down a little bit. We usually go about 1.5 degrees colder on the fermentation temperature, and then we even with that 1.5 degrees colder, we see fermentation and primary fermentation in about 2 days less.
Cool. Okay.
On second and third pitches.
Does anybody else have any questions for either Calum or Lauren?
Nothing lager related, but are you guys going to do another spontaneous beer?
Look at this guy coming in with those funky things.
I gotta ask. I'm a fanboy.
Yeah, that's not a style. That's not a style. But what do I know?
Yeah, we've made about 6, I think, cool ship beers here, but we've got a blend that probably we're gonna do sometime in the next couple months, and then it'll be like a couple months after bottling before that's ready. But I think we're gonna maybe do a couple versions of like maybe adding some other things to it as well, and not just doing the like clean work. Yeah. Cool.
A little heart in Patrick's lips. Jeez.
So there's a question about the yeast starter on a stir plate that provides quite a bit of oxygen. The oxygen is going to be good for like yeast cell growth, but the wort needs to be oxygenated for sure. I don't know if what people, I think the most you can saturate wort with without pure oxygen is like, I think about 8. But I think like we used to do, I used to work at a brewery that had open fermenters, and we would just come in through the top and just splash it all down into the tank. And that gave us like enough for a healthy ale fermentation. So it was just like open fermentation into a flat bottomed open top. Yeah.
Nice. My understanding is the farmhouse that you guys have is like once the weather gets to be, it's not nice now, but once it gets to be nicer, it's actually quite a nice location to come sit down, have a little bit of a picnic, have your beers from Sonnen Hill, and do you guys see that as being something that's going to hopefully continue? I know it's not necessarily always up to you because there is the government involved, but
yeah, last year was our first year for the outdoor beer garden, and it was pretty casual. We didn't have food or anything, but people could bring their own. The great thing about it was there was lots of space, and there were outdoor washrooms, so people just had to come in to order their beer, and then they could social distance happily out there. We have added some indoor space for a few tables for if it rains. We have an indoor tap room now. But when the weather warms up in the next couple weeks, the picnic tables and umbrellas will be out. If it gets chilly, we'll light a fire. We have trails on the property that we're going to open up to the public this year, so you can take a walk with your dog and your kids. And we are going to try to add in some food elements, so like a picnic takeaway fridge, and then to do some additional food events a couple times a month as well. So if you want to come out, look out for those things. But yeah, we'll be open for outside, like go crazy out there. You know, it's pretty safe in my mind. So yeah.
Well, we could do GTA Brews road trip, David.
It's not up to me.
Arrange it. Let's go do it.
Mr.
driving. Attila, you driving the bus?
Sure, let's go. I'll drive the bus.
The club bus.
I think that's great though. Like, I mean, because always looking for a little bit of a trip that we can go to out in the country. My wife used to live in Port Hope, and we'd go for these long walks and some of the concessions. So it's always kind of nice to look for that, because in the city, I could walk the dog on main streets. It's not the same, right? So.
I know you're joking, Attila, but I think as a club we have been talking about doing more club outings. I think definitely Sonnen Hill, like Lauren and Calum, will definitely reach out if we do get enough people. We'll maybe rent a bus or something like that and come up as a group. And obviously we would love to get out there and see your brewery and see you guys again in person whenever we can.
Sure. You know what? Rent the bus. I'll drive it. I don't care.
Yeah.
I got my ACMs, Ed. Let's go.
I gotta check the club's insurance policy before.
Let me know. I'll do it.
If there's Keith in the chat actually said July meeting plans, so he's got an idea, right? But if there's are there any other questions for Lauren and Calum? And if there's not, I want to say thank you.
Okay. You guys are on. Sorry, you're in a farm brewery, right? Do you like your water supply? Is it well, or is it actually municipal water you guys use for your brewing?
It's a well
water.
It's a well water, and then we're on. We have to treat our own wastewater as well, so we don't have any sewers. So we treat it all on site and then discharge it into a septic.
Right.
Leach field.
And you have enough water on site to do the brewing, or you have to bring it in. I know the county, if you go down there, either they have lots of water or they don't have water. They got to keep bringing the damn water in. So you guys have enough water?
I hope so.
Okay. Okay. Good. Cool. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
If there's no other questions, then I just want to say thank you to both Lauren and Calum for being here tonight and walking us through the incredible lagers that you guys have. And I know that you guys have other stuff, because I have 2 of this and that in the fridge, and I was about this close to picking up some No Worry as well, but maybe the next time I'll pick up some of that, is because it sounded so good. So
spiff.
Yeah, these, like, even the I know Eric had mentioned the pale beer, which is apparently a footer aged beer that's just so much good stuff. That it's good to see these types of beers. I mean, especially the lagers coming out and being produced en masse by these smaller craft breweries like yourself, leading the charge, I want to say, right? Like you mentioned BIM earlier. Yeah, we know BIM, but it's kind of nice to see others, right? And we want others, right? So thank you very much for gracing us with the information that you've provided us, and for talking about the beers. And we'll definitely be seeing you guys again.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And if anyone ever has any questions, just you can email the info@Sonnen Hill. sonnenhill.com, or you can just email myself or Lauren at like our names at sonnenhill.com.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, guys.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you. See ya. Have a good night.